This unreleased Mario game is absolutely insane. The interesting story of gaming provides us with many mysteries and unanswered questions. Amongst the most intriguing of these exists around this game, a full-blown sequel to Super Mario World, which sadly was cancelled and then lost to the past. An alternative reality where a different Super Mario World follow-up exists is a fascinating one to say the least. However, while we never got this game, fortunately there are now modern methods available that not only allow us to learn more about this canned project, but perhaps more poignantly, even let us play what remains of it for ourselves. So with all that said, I am Lady Decade and this is Super Mario's Wacky World, the lost Super Mario World sequel. Throughout the 8-bit era of gaming, it is no secret that Super Mario became a household name, gaining immense traction by starring in multiple amazing games on the Nintendo 8-bit system. While it felt that gaming-wise things could not get any better for the Italian plumber, the world would soon be proven wrong with the epicness that was Super Mario World for the Super Nintendo. This now legendary title had it all and offered up the most graphically impressive and mechanically refined Mario experience yet. There were so many reasons to love this one, including all new levels to play through, Yoshi to ride, plenty of new power-ups, and tons of secrets, all depicted in stunning 16-bit graphics. Mario's adventure in Dinosaur Land was the most epic yet, leading many people to dream of a sequel. Of course though, if you are familiar with your gaming history, it is well known that nearing the end of the Super Nintendo's life, a prequel to this classic adventure would be released known as Yoshi's Island, a game which on Western shores was titled Super Mario World 2 Yoshi's Island. So we did get an official excellent follow-up to this game, but personally I didn't think it was much like the original. While this was a fun game, even its most die-hard fans would happily admit that this adventure is nothing like Mario World and instead featured its own distinct art style and unique gameplay, establishing Yoshi's signature characteristics for an entire series of spin-off titles. It was kind of like when the game Wario Land Super Mario Land 3 spawned an entire lineup of Wario games after its success. Wario Land was great and all, however it didn't look or play anything like its predecessors and starred a completely different playable character too. So with that said, let's talk about the real Super Mario World sequel. Prior to the smash hit Yoshi game's release, Mario World was actually set to receive a true sequel, a game that would both look and mechanically function similarly to the original. You know, a Mario game where you played as Mario, which was planned to play like an actual Mario game rather than a quirky spin-off. While such an idea was lovely and all, what may have been a shock and surprise to many at the time though, is that this game was not only not intended for the Super Nintendo, but in an even crazier twist, was not intended to be enjoyed on Nintendo hardware at all. Pretty crazy, right? There were a lot of dubious gaming platforms in the early 90s, so therefore customers had to be really careful about how they spent their money. It was easy to plough a fortune into the likes of the 3DO, only to invest in a console that would end up receiving hardly any good games for it. Fortunately, great systems exist today, and although many modern games are very, very expensive during this cost of living crisis, due to Instant Gaming sponsoring of this video, I can get you thousands of games for up to 90% cheaper than on other platforms simply by following my affiliate link. I have saved hundreds of dollars by regularly using this service myself, often finding myself binge shopping for a dozen games for the same cost of buying just one new game from other sources. So happy shopping, as there are games over there for everyone. Unfortunately, no copy of Wacky Worlds can be found for sale because, as stated, it was only intended to be enjoyed on one very niche piece of hardware. Rather than being created for Nintendo's highly successful 16-bit console, this sequel was being developed for the now infamous Philips CDI, an interactive media device and a system that I and of course many other YouTubers have uploaded dedicated videos all about in the past. So this might have you wondering why such a a historic game was set to debut on such a controversial platform. So let's dig further into this perplexing decision. The roots of the creation of Super Mario's Wacky Worlds traces all the way back to 1988, when the Sony Corporation began working with Nintendo to create the Super Nintendo CD-ROM, a coveted unreleased device more commonly referred to today as the Nintendo PlayStation. Through this time period, Nintendo signed a contract with Sony to produce this system, planning it to be compatible with existing SNES titles as well as other titles released for the Sony Super Disc format. But once again, if you know your history, things would only go Pete Tong from here. Nintendo President Hiroshi Yamauchi was already wary of Sony and deemed the current plans unacceptable. Nintendo became increasingly concerned, as Sony would be the sole provider of the audio chip, the SSMP, used in the SNES, requiring developers to pay for an expensive development tool from Sony. The initial agreement with Sony granted the electronics giant a significant influence over the licensing of games and the collection of royalties from CD-ROM games. This arrangement conflicted with Nintendo's established business model, which relied heavily on controlling the game development ecosystem and maintaining a larger share of the profits. In pursuit of a more favourable arrangement, Nintendo secretly negotiated a separate deal with Philips, another electronics company, to develop their CD-ROM technology. This alternative partnership was designed to provide Nintendo with better terms and greater control over both the software and hardware ecosystems, ensuring that they could maintain their strategic and financial interests. The situation came to a head at the infamous Consumer Electronics Show in 1991, where Sony announced their collaboration with Nintendo to develop the Nintendo PlayStation, a hybrid console combining Nintendo's gaming expertise with Sony's CD-ROM technology. However, in a surprising turn of events, Nintendo announced the very next day that they were partnering with Philips instead, effectively withdrawing from the deal with Sony and leaving their former partner in the lurch. Underlying these events were significant strategic differences between the two companies. Nintendo's conservative approach was focused on maintaining control and ensuring profitability, while Nintendo aimed to establish a strong foothold in the gaming market by leveraging their expertise in audio and video technology. The collapse of the deal led Sony to develop their own console, the Sony PlayStation, which of course became a major competitor to Nintendo and reshaped the gaming industry. This decision ultimately contributed to the rise of Sony as a formidable player in the console market. But what about Nintendo's deal with Philips? Prior to the CES, with the deal with Sony still in place, a paranoid and protectionist Yamauchi started to see a more favourable partner in Philips. This would lead to Yamauchi sending Nintendo of America employees to the Netherlands to negotiate a more favourable deal with the European giant. While the PlayStation brand we are all familiar with would rise from the ashes of this mess, the Philips deal to create the Super Nintendo Philips add-on or console never materialised, with to this day no prototype ever surfacing. However, while such a piece of hardware was never to be, part of the same deal that was struck allowed Philips to access some of Nintendo's biggest IPs, allowing them the unprecedented rights to be able to produce games featuring Nintendo characters for the Philips CDI interactive media player. I guess some memes do come true. This led to an entire trilogy of critically panned Zelda games appearing on the system, and even an officially released Mario game in the form of Hotel Mario. While Hotel Mario is arguably not a bad game, few would disagree with the opinion that it was substandard compared to Mario's main outings on the NES, Super Nintendo, or even the Game Boy. Consequently, Nintendo often tried to erase this part of history, with none of the CDI Zelda games, for example, receiving coverage in the Hyrule Historia, with all three of them seemingly absent from the Zelda chronological timeline, with Nintendo opting to wipe them from the history books quite literally. In all honesty, only a true warrior can appreciate these bizarre games, but whether Nintendo likes it or not, each of these games exists and remains a celebrated corner of meme culture.
Whatever I see, I shall devour. What the hell is even that?
This is illegal, you know.
Anyway, despite their awesome capacity for inspiring amazing YouTube poop, most would agree that games on the Philips CDI that included Nintendo licenses were either terrible or underwhelming at best. However, as covered, not all games that were worked on would actually end up seeing official releases on the panned hardware. During this strange period in gaming, a development house known as Nova Logic thought that they could be the ones to deliver a worthy Nintendo CDI experience, which brings us nicely to the creation of Super Mario's Wacky Worlds. But were they ever truly up to the task? Let's explore. Nova Logic were a California-based company founded in 1985 by John Garcia, a man who had a background in computer software, who had found early success porting games like Bubble Bobble to the Apple II computer and Arkanoid games to the DOS format. Some experience and expertise were clearly there, but whether he and his team were capable of creating a credible Mario game for the Philips CDI was a different question altogether. Regardless of the hanging question, Nova Logic would choose to embark on the company's most ambitious project yet. Work on Super Mario's Wacky Worlds began after a Nintendo sales executive suggested that a simplified style of a Super Nintendo game could be adapted to run on the CDI. This led Nova Logic programmers Silas Warner and John Brooks to work tirelessly for 24 hours a day for 2 weeks solid in order to try their best to create something worthy of demonstrating to Nintendo bosses. The quest to a Super Mario World sequel was on. Despite the hard work, this was only enough time to complete parts of one level to present to Nintendo. However, what was produced was of a high enough standard that this was enough to impress Nintendo. What makes this moment in history all the cooler is that not only do we know that this happened, but we can even experience what they created for ourselves. Fortunately, the game's final pre-alpha prototype, created in March 1993 after a year of solid work, is spectacularly available to download and play online. This means we can all delve into Super Mario's Wacky Worlds. From what exists of this game, Nina Stanley, the game's artist, managed to complete approximately 80% of the game's art, and designer Marty Folger successfully completed around 95% of the overall design too. Building on this, 30% of the game's code was also completed, resulting in a fair portion of this game being made. This prototype, which is available to experience, features music taken straight from Mario World, though no sound effects were programmed in aside from jumping. It is suspected that the music used in the game simply functions as a placeholder rather than what would have been found if the title saw an official release, but at least it gives the game a slightly more complete feel. Regarding the creative process when making this game, developers have claimed that one of the toughest phases of its development was managing to capture sprites from Super Mario World and getting them functional on a Philips CDI due to the vast differences in hardware. If you are familiar with your CDI history, the hardware was never actually even intended to be marketed as a game console, with Philips deciding to change how they would choose to position the system after it failed to catch on as a broader interactive media player. So it's no wonder it was so difficult to make decent games for. Still, looking at the gameplay today, the team did a commendable job. While many of the sprites in Wacky Worlds were taken from Mario World, they function well, giving us a good feel of what could have been. Speaking of what can be found when experiencing the Wacky Worlds prototype, the level select screen shows that the game is broken into categories based on ancient times, such as ancient Greece, Egypt and the Aztecs, as well as other settings like the Arctic, jungle and haunted lands. The game mixes things up with a stage selection labelled as Wacky and another labelled Tubular, a term popular in 1993. The enemy designs in the game include Greek Koopas, Night Koopas, Eskimo Koopas and Vampire Koopas. There are also completely new enemies, like walruses. Wacky Worlds looked like an exciting prospect, and although the level progression was never completed, interesting features include warp pipes, a Trojan horse, and stylized M objects, all of which are non-functional but all present in the game. Holding all of this in mind and what we can see and experience, if more time had been given, I strongly believe that this game had the potential to become the CDI's killer app. A game that, if perfect, could have potentially made non-CDI owners envious and given people a reason to seek out the hardware today beyond an appreciation for internet meme culture.
Luigi, look!
Despite Nintendo's initial eagerness about the project, poor CDI sales forced NovaLogic to cancel their Mario game. The disappointment led to many NovaLogic employees to leave for Electronic Arts, with it also being speculated that the game could have been completed faster and possibly released if NovaLogic had invested more money into the project. Instead, they reportedly invested very little into Wacky Worlds, pumping their cash flow into their Comanche series instead. Today, 3 different prototype phases of this Mario game circulate online, offering a close-up look at the various developmental stages of this intriguing project. I strongly advise you to check them out for yourself if you want to learn more about this mysterious game. If you are still here by this point, it probably goes without saying that you love gaming. As a reward for your patience and digesting this video, I'd like to remind you that you can get up to 90% off of thousands of amazing games. Every purchase not only gets you brilliant titles for next to nothing, but the more you binge shop and take up these bargain bucket offers, the more it directly supports this channel too. Or, if you want to support this channel in a more personal way and gain access to my forever growing cosplay photo library, then please consider backing the show on Patreon. Thank you, and I'll see you all in the next video.